Welcome, everyone, to tonight's installment of the webinar series being sponsored by the Masters in English Language Teaching for Autonomous Learning Environments and the Masters in English Language Teaching for Self-Directed Learning of the Department of Foreign Languages and Cultures at the Universidad de La Sabana in Bogota, Colombia. These spaces, these webinars have really been designed for you. So please do not hesitate to ask questions, and please feel free to interact with all of us, and you can share your own experiences as well. However, although there will be a open question and answer portion later in this session, we need to ask everyone to keep microphones off during the presentation portion. During the presentation, or during the question and answer portion, you can use the chat panel, the chat box over there, to ask or respond to questions or to post your comments. And this session is being recorded. So after it is complete, we will be uploading a video recording to the Unisabana ELT Facebook page, as well as to our website, along with a document outlining the questions and practical answers discussed in the session. And we do hope that you enjoy this experience, and we hope you will let us know about other topics you might like to see us address in our webinars in the future. And now, without further ado, please let me introduce the speakers for tonight's session. One of them is me. Hello, my name is Carl Edlund Anderson. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Foreign Languages and Cultures at the Universidad de La Sabana in Bogota, Colombia. I'm currently on the scientific committees for the GIST Education and Learning Research Journal in Colombia and Scandia Journal of Medieval Norse Studies in Brazil. I previously served as editor-in-chief of the Latin American Journal of Content and Language Integrated Learning. I've published articles on various topics in the humanities, social sciences, and physical sciences in index journals. I have an AB in folklore and mythology from Harvard College and a PhD from the Faculty of English at the University of Cambridge, as well as a CELTA from the British Council in Bogota, Colombia. And my research interests include rhetorical communication, CLIL, philology, and Colombian minority languages. Enough about me. Let me introduce, over in the other corner of the screen, Dr. Liliana Cuesta Medina, an associate professor in the Department of Foreign Languages at the Universidad de La Sabana, who holds a PhD in English philology from the Faculty of Humanities at the Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia in Madrid, Spain. And her research areas include COL, CLIL, academic writing, learners' self-regulation in blended and virtual learning environments. And on these topics, she has led various research projects and published in books and international journals and conference proceedings. You can also follow myself and Lilian on social media and through other academically oriented sites. We will be trying to post some links to these during the session, and if all else fails, in our final slide in the session, we will show some links to where you can find us online as well. But now, let's get started with tonight's session. We don't have all night, and I'm sure everyone has important plans for the evening. So again, thanks for logging in. Now let me go ahead and explain what we're going to be doing tonight. Here's the agenda slide. Hopefully everyone can see. We've already had our sort of little introduction to the webinar. The main content for tonight is myself and Dr. Cuesta are going to be addressing myths about research in ELT. We are both professors in the research courses and component of the master's programs at the Sabana, and so we're going to be talking about a lot of the myths that some of our students, especially over the years, have made us aware of, things that we find as we work in the field, and try to share a little bit about what is this thing that is research and researching, and how does all that work, and what is it for? So that's going to be our main topic tonight. We're going to be addressing some of those issues. And then we're going to open the floor up to questions and answers with you. You can ask questions about some of the topics we've already discussed. You may have other questions You may want to share your experiences as a teacher, a researcher, or both. And then that will be concluding the session just about at 7 o'clock, so we don't take too much of everyone's time up. And I think now my excellent colleague Liliana and
Yep.
myself are ready to begin. Yes.
Great.
So
Thank you, Carl, for the great introduction and welcome everybody. I mean, I'm so glad to be here because I'm recognizing some familiar faces from our chat friends. So it's fantastic to be here. As Carl was mentioning, what we're going to share is just more and more stories of our paths in research. So it's fantastic to have people from a little bit of some corners from the world. I see our fantastic colleague Carolina Ognero from Argentina. I see a lot of people also from Colombia, our former alumni, good friends such as Evelyn Valencia. So it's fantastic to have you here, and also people from Bogota, from other partner universities. So that's also a great opportunity. So without further ado, as Carl was mentioning, how's that we are going to develop the session, I'm going just to go with the first myth. Okay, so the first myth, which you're going to be, well, actually not myth per se, but then we're going to just twist it a little bit because there are myths behind this paradigm, which is what's research. Okay, so according to that, you're going to just deal with the questions. So, Carl, the floor is yours. What's research?
thanks. We thought this would be a good place to start. Hello also to some of the familiar names. I think Carlos out there, one of Liliana's and my co-authors occasionally, and Mr. Kelland from Florida. Long time no see. Well, now from Florida. But anyway, we thought we'd start with what is research, because that's one of the biggest myths that we run into. People are just really not sure what all this means. They have visions of white-robed people in laboratories and things. Um, Ultimately, there's a lot of ways that you can describe research, and I'm sure you can find a lot. One of the ways that I think that I like to characterize it, especially for students who come into our courses, is it's about finding new knowledge, finding things that weren't known before. Researchers really deal with three questions. The first one is, where are we now? What do we know? What's the status quo? What are we doing? And then the second question that is particular to research, I think, is what's wrong with where we are? What's wrong with what we're doing? What's wrong with what we know? And that's a question that is often uncomfortable for people to get to grips with, especially if you work in education or if you've come through a standard Western educational system. We're taught that you're supposed to know. People are supposed to know things. The answers are in the back of the book. We're supposed to have all the correct techniques and processes. But the researcher will turn that around and say, well, research is about really what we don't know. It's about those rigidly defined areas of doubt and uncertainty. So starting with the question, what do we know? What's the status quo? What are we doing now? We move to the second question, what's wrong with the status quo? What's wrong with what we know? What's wrong with what we're doing now? And then third, also really important for research, is what can we do to change what we know, what we're doing now, the status quo? And that's really what research is about. It's about moving from where we are to deciding what's wrong with where we are, and then to move forward to some new place where we advance what we know and we start to change what's wrong and make it more right. So that's one of the key things that really informs everything else that we'll probably talk about tonight. The second question that we wanted to get through sort of quickly to establish where we are is this other one that people come up to us with. Who can be a researcher? Is there a test? Is there a qualification? Do you have to have a license? Do you have to have a white coat and walk around in a laboratory? And the answer, of course, is no. The answer is anyone can be a researcher. And this sometimes shocks people who come to us because they think, well, don't you need like amazing qualifications and you had to go to this fancy university and you have to know a lot of things and study a lot and you have to be, special and qualified and certified. And, it's not for me because I'm not special and qualified and certified. And the answer is sure, researchers know a lot and studied a lot and learned a lot and probably have some pieces of paper on their wall or in the closet or something. But the real answer to the question is, of course, that everyone can be a researcher, no matter who you're thinking of, whether it's the most famous researcher in English language teaching, or it's Einstein, or it's Stephen Hawking, or whoever it is. They all started out in the same place. Everybody was born into the world not knowing a great deal, and then it's a question of where do we go from here? So who could be a researcher? Everyone, and that includes teachers, that includes students, that includes people no matter who they are or where they are in the world. It's really a question of going back to that first question and thinking, well, what is it that we know and what's wrong with what we know? And what am I going to do to improve what we know or fix what's wrong with what we know? So that ends up being, to an extent, the answer to the question, who can be a researcher? Everyone, any one of our students, any one of your students can be a researcher. So that's fairly important to understand. And perhaps, Liliana, you could add something to that observation from your experience.
Sure. And it leads us to the next question, as Carl will display it in a second. This is one of the common myths, the most common myths. There is this myth that we didn't include in the presentation, but we thought when we were conversing about this talk, how difficult it is to conduct research, right? And for those of us who have been, most of us have been at the university level or at the secondary level, elementary level. We have been also trained at the university. We have heard, and even we live that that you feel kind of threatened a little bit by your research teachers. And we always walk into the classroom, the four of us. We are a team of four, who actually a team of five, who teach research in the two master's programs. And we demystify that myth from the first moment in which you entered in the classroom. And Carl was mentioning all of these great minds, starting at a special point of inquiry before conducting their great experiments. And if you start thinking that research is achievable, research is doable, and research is something that it's attainable, that is one of the ways or one of the paths towards you should go and can go to believe that this is possible, right? It's a little bit of the self-efficacious belief that you can conduct research. You don't need to be Einstein. You don't need to be, one of these great minds. You are already a great mind, right? And this is what we want to instill in our students. And, not only to demystify the myth of, research is always, the nightmare of the classes. We always want to enjoy the class and to work with them. And as one of my most loved teachers that I remember her, Elena Barcena from UNED, she, at the day that I was defending my thesis, my doctoral thesis, she said, Liliana, you're going to go into that room in 5 minutes, right? While you panic, let me remind you a few things. One, you're going to be fine because you worked the work and you're here because it's just, part of the protocol. And two, because there is no one in this planet who knows more about what you were investigating. So I always tell this anecdote because I think that this is one of the best tool to demystify that research is not attainable, is not doable, and it's also a nightmare. So coming to that, who can be a researcher? I echo Carl, right? Anyone can be a researcher. There are certain skills that you need to be a researcher. Naturally, the first one, it's the passion to discover and the passion for inquire about things, right? So if you have that gut, that instinct, it's a little bit of a gut, an instinct, which becomes then later an elaborated skill, you are, ready to go. We can go to the next question. Um, and then this supposes taking out, I mean, we are all teachers, I believe, right? All of our audience members are all teachers or are in an administrator position, well, which includes being a teacher and also being an administrator. This also includes and sets up the perfect arena to take off the research hat and put on the researcher's hat. So this simply means to take and maximize and optimize all of the opportunities that we have in the classroom, to take advantage of that and to use them as the phenomenon or the phenomena that we are going to be investigating, right? So we always tell our students that we have a lab of ideas. Our students, our beliefs, their students' backgrounds, their students' beliefs, the performances, the expected, the desired proficiency levels, you name the list. If we were brainstorming tonight about the possibilities that we can research, yeah, and even today, under the conditions that we are living, in the world, we have thousands. I mean, we have a myriad of possibilities about what to research about. But having this, like lens, magnifying lens, I would say, it's one of the, skills that you really need to be able to see what's going on, to be able to reflect upon what you are to find and also what you're finding. So that is one of the possibilities that you have. And you have the tools, right? You have the tools. You have them over there in your classroom. You have them over there with a group of teachers if it is that you are in a position of, being the director of the department or being the coordinator. You have lots of possibilities. You have the subjects. I mean, to conduct research, and now to conduct research in our field, which is mostly, the social sciences, the humanities, you have the possibility to conduct research with limited resources, which is, practically what a lot of our teachers and a lot of us have, right? Limited resources meaning infrastructure speaking, right? In the humanities, we need our reasoning, our pen, computers, inquiry, our critical reasoning, and many other skills that could be applicable. We don't need a lot of complicated, proofs, labs, yeah, to do and to conduct research. Our classroom is the lab, so take that into consideration. Another typical myth, right? Is okay, I am not a researcher, I'm not a writer. So tonight we are going to tell you to look at the opposite, right, to that myth, right? You are a researcher, therefore you become a skillful writer. You write, I mean, it would be a syllogism. You write, then you research, or vice versa. The only consideration, and Carl will recap on that, the only consideration and one of the most important arguments that we advocate for is that when you write about your research, you need to approach it with a critical eye. You need to distance emotionally yourself from the problem and from your research to be able to observe better and to find a solution to it. So we always tell our students, and we display this diagram to our third and fourth semester students. We always tell our students that the research studies need to fulfill these four principles: the principle of pertinence, the principle of concreteness, the principle of objectivity, and the principle of transferability. So we believe and we strongly advocate for these fundamental principles of research, so you are seeing research and seeing the phenomenon as a doable and as an attainable, in order to recap my former words, as an attainable phenomenon. And you are able also to see what is what you're investigating, but not from a cheesy perspective. And it's like, I am the most wonderful researcher, or this is my most wonderful, project. You need to be objective enough to treat the subject matter. So pretty much that's one of the ideas. And together with this, we also advocate, right, to deal with the pertinence component or the pertinence principle. And so your research study, it's as, again, remember that this is kind of a chain. It's a doable and attainable, a solvable problem, and it impacts, look at the three circles. It impacts first your target educational institution, two, your local community, Bogota, Colombia, and you have something to say um, to the ELT global communities. So these are three of the things that have been, up to now recapping on. And this is a way also to convince your students and convince your research, your co-researchers, your friends, that doing research is something that it's possible. And you can do research because you believe that it's possible. So when you believe that something is possible, it's just a basic self-efficacy principle, you're able to attain it. So the floor is to Mr. Anderson, so who's going to be talking about this other myth, which ties a little bit with things that I was talking about.
Yeah, this is a bit of a cliche, but it's a really important one and it's worth repeating. Act locally, but think globally. Or think globally and act locally if you prefer, one or the other, or both. Many of our students who are teachers who are still working on getting the teacher hat and the researcher hat sorted out in their wardrobes. They'll come in and they'll be really focused on finding solutions for their classroom. And they think, okay, research is about me going and reading some books and finding the best solutions for my classroom in here, and then I go and implement them. And really, it's about finding things that we don't understand how they work. If it's already a solution, we don't necessarily need to research it. But if we don't understand it, if it might not be a solution everywhere, then there are things we need to do. But in order to decide what we need to do in our classrooms, wherever we are in the world, we also need to keep in mind what's going on elsewhere in the world. And this is one of the biggest myths in education generally. You can't just take things from somewhere else and bring them into your local context. But you can take ideas that your colleagues, other teachers and researchers from around the world have been trying out and working on. And if you're thinking like that researcher as well as like a teacher, you can adapt them and try them out. And so there's one of the things that research in ELT especially has to be working on. Making sure that our work is pertinence, locally and relevant to the context that we're in, and that we're not just blindly taking things from somewhere and throwing them into a context where they don't necessarily fit, but that we are adapting and thinking about, this is something that needs to be tried out here, but it's also going to give me information about not only how well it works in my classroom, but it's going to be of interest and relevance to people elsewhere around the world. People also like me, other teachers and researchers who are thinking about, what are we doing now and what's wrong with what we're doing now and how are we going to change what we're doing now. So very much we're going to research locally, teach locally, but we're going to be thinking and communicating globally, which I think brings us on to our next issue, which is really important and possibly one of the scariest things for many of the students who come through our program, which is this realization that being a researcher is not just being somebody trying stuff out in the classroom, which is something teachers are really good at and do all the time anyway, try stuff out in the classroom. And it's not just being somebody in a white coat or a genius somewhere stuck in an ivory tower in a library. It also means being a communicator. And for research, this means being a writer. And this is something that many people are not accustomed to. And it's especially difficult for many people who work in ELT research, because many of those people feel like they're not a native speaker, they're not have a good command of the language and so forth. But it's important to remember that nobody comes into the research world with a native command of academic language, regardless of whether you are writing in English or Spanish or Russian or Chinese. The genre and forms and expectations for all of these kinds of means of communication are a little bit different from those that we teach in conversational classes. Liliana, can you perhaps add something to that?
Sure, Carl. So basically, as Carl was mentioning, this is another of the myth, the typical myths that our students come, as I was recapping on and telling you before, our students come with the belief, with the opposite self-efficacy belief that they are not possible, that they can't write. And then this is a myth and both a problem, and so it's a myth, right, that we have to deal with every day on a daily basis with our graduate students. They come and say, oh, writing is hard, there I don't, I can't do it. And then if it is writing about my research, it's even worse. So another target to demystify is to alleviate the balance and the dead weight that the students put in their shoulders concerning this myth. So there are lots of strategies that we implement to tell students to work with their best of writing abilities and start developing them, because there are students who come to our programs with lots of difficulties, and we really scaffold them until the point that they actually are empowered or semi-empowered at an initial level, to be honest with you. And then little by little, they scaffold and they boost their writing abilities. And as Carl will tell you in the upcoming slides, and as he will display, this is one of the situations that brings a student to the point in which they struggle and they also worry and they stress a lot, because one big challenge and one big burden under the writing difficulties is the lack of recognizing the different types of genres and the different types of tasks, speaking at the writing level tasks that they have to comply with. So at an initial point, they believe, and this ties to our former um, arguments, this ties to the belief that everything is narrative, right? Or everything is autobiographical. That's why they become a lot of, they become involved, and they are very engaged in their studies to the point in which they have a hard time to, to decentralize themselves from the writing piece and from the manuscript. But Carl, you get the ideas concerning the genres and the research community participation and some other tips Carl will just share with you now.
Yeah, it's definitely the case that if one is going to be a communicator in a community, one has to understand how that community works. And I think especially in modern language teaching, ELT and other fields, we spend so much time as teachers trying to get our students to communicate and express themselves and this kind of thing, that we're used to this kind of approach. And it's important to realize that for many of our students who come to the program, that by joining a research community, which they've done by becoming graduate students, by taking that decision to say, yes, I'm going to be a teacher, a researcher as well as a teacher, I'm entering that new world, that it really is in some ways entering a new world. If you move from Latin America to Japan, you will have a whole bunch of new customs and expectations and ways of doing things. And if you're going to be successful in that move, then you need to learn those. Likewise, if you move from Japan to Latin America, or from any different kind of community in the world to another one, you have to learn the cultural norms and expectations of that community. And so that is a great challenge for many of our students who come into the program, realizing that, oh, I can't just write this however I want. I can't just make things the way I want. There's a particular genre here that is expected by the community. There are particular ways of doing things, and I have to now learn those new ways. So a lot of what we found, and we've actually published on this, is that the problems that students have or that new researchers have are not really so much technical. They're not even language related, although especially in the language teaching community, people often assume that problems are language problems. They're really questions of culture shock as much as anything else. And that's a problem that we have more generally in our educational systems in many countries, is that we don't really adequately prepare our students for what they might experience in their professional or academic lives later on. We don't make students aware that, hey, you might have to change the way you communicate depending on the kind of genre you might be writing in or speaking in orally, as we're doing now, or you would do at a conference, etc. There are different kinds of ways that people have to do things, and we need to be prepared to switch from one to another. So because being a researcher is being a writer, knowing the expectations of communication in that community ends up being tremendously important. It's no good discovering how to change the status quo and make the world a better place if you can't tell people about it. And if you can't tell people about it in a way that they will respect and pay attention to, then it's even worse. You've done a lot of work and now you can't get that message out. So this ends up being a really important thing that researchers have to go through and have to learn. Liliana, perhaps you could tell us a bit about this topic. This is another one we've been working on a lot recently. Hearing people's voices.
Sure, and I would just post it in our chat that we discussed this. I mean, the time limit for today is very restricted, so we hope you read us in one of our publications that we particularly discuss these situations further in reference and in regards to the problems and perhaps the myths. As you will read our article, you would just make the connection between our perspectives and our arguments. And this is another problem and also a myth, when novice researchers approach us and they, together with the paradigm in thinking that they are not able to conduct research or writing, and the way it comes especially to writing, and not only writing, we have also seen in spoken pieces, they have the hard time finding their voices, and not only finding, discovering, but also making them or say them out loud. Metaphorically speaking, we say that they have difficulties to make their voices be heard, to position themselves as writers or as speakers in, an argumentative and a persuasive context, right? Which is one of them, one that is most prioritized in academia, in our field. Our students, have like a curtain, an initial curtain or an initial block that prevents them from acting out and discovering their voices. So this is both a myth, but it's sadly a reality. And there is where, if you are one of these novice researchers, or if you deal with novice researchers, as I know that a lot of our colleagues today are dealing with graduate students and even with undergraduate or secondary or elementary students, starting from elementary, if we had been told and taught about how to position ourselves from a critical thinking perspective and how to make our voices be heard, our students and ourselves would haven't struggled that much, right? So a good thing to approach this is coming from the myth and coming from the barrier and from the problem, trying to find out what to do, teaching them, the norms, as Carl was mentioning, the norms and the guidelines for persuasive academic writing, and moving on along and across the plateau, so they are scaffolded and they can really achieve the point in which they feel naturally when producing an argument and expressing it, because um, it's just necessary. I mean, to be able to participate in the global discussion or in the local discussion that we were referring in our past slides and in our past minutes from this talk, requires a lot of efforts, but also requires from you as the guide, as the facilitator, to scaffold your student to the point in which they are also able to produce this type of things. Because as we said, and as Carl said, a lot of the myths, which we're not going to go there because we are getting closer to the open room questions and answers, what it's prioritized in the academic writing field, as we discuss in our publication, as we have found it, it's that teachers are more concerned about spelling, for example, and about the format of the paper, which we are not saying that it's not important. It is important, but it's not as important as what you're seeing on the screen. Teaching them how to do, how to consolidate a strong argument and how to make their voice be heard. It's more important, way more important, than to know where the comma is placed. Just to talk about what the format and the content and the genre pyramid that we all know that we have to deal.
Well, thanks, Liliana. I'm sure we could probably talk for hours about any of these topics, and it's probably best that people prevent us from doing this. So we definitely like to invite you to join the conversation, share your questions, comments, experiences. We're already getting some questions here, which I think we can start to try to address. Aleida asks, this is the $1 million question in some ways, the million bazillion peso question. What would be an efficient and appropriate approach to incorporating academic writing in EFL undergraduate teacher preparation programs in the Colombian context? And that's a question which is very similar to the one which we spend a lot of time answering. Even though we're working with graduate students, I would say that it's true in Colombia, probably many parts of Latin America, and also I think true in much of the English-speaking and the wider Western world, that academic writing is not well taught or even necessarily well understood in schools. And for a very long time, it's been left for students to arrive at university and they're supposed to acquire it by osmosis. So I think this is actually a question that can be applied to a lot of educational contexts, not just the Colombian one. And if I had a simple and easy answer for that question, I don't know if I'd be rich, but I would certainly be better known than I am. There's a number of issues that we could address there. One is simply, I think, the understanding that academic writing is academic language, if we go away from writing and communication, academic language is nobody's first language. Unless something very strange has happened to you, you don't learn the language of writing an essay at university or writing a thesis at your kitchen table with your family at the playground and the park with your friends growing up. Maybe you learned a bit more if your parents are all academics, but not really. academic language is like we said, you join a community, a culture, and you start learning the new variety. You've moved to a new town, you've moved to a new region, you've moved to a new country, and they have a different accent, they use different vocabulary, they say things in different ways, and they have particular objectives. So one, I think it's important for when teaching academic writing to realize that just because somebody already speaks Spanish doesn't mean they can write well in Spanish. Just because somebody speaks English doesn't mean they can write well in English, at least for the standards of what we expect in professional or academic communication. The next most important thing for people to realize, and this is one thing that our schools, primary and secondary schools, get very badly wrong, I think, is that academic writing is argumentative, in fundamentally argumentative. It took me a year or so at university before I realized I was getting bad grades because I was doing what I was taught in school, which was reading and regurgitating. And that wasn't at all what my professors wanted. And they didn't have a way to articulate that to me, and I didn't understand it. And I did eventually figure it out by osmosis. And I realized, oh, I'm supposed to be fighting about something. I'm supposed to have a point of view, and I'm supposed to defend it by presenting a logical argument with recourse to evidence. And then I might have to do that differently if I'm writing for biology, or if I'm writing for the humanities, or if I'm writing for philosophy. I might have to tune my argument and the way that I communicate to the needs of my communities. There we go back to the standards of the community and genre again. But that's fundamental. Students have to learn that they have to have a point of view on something. It has to be a point of view that people could dispute, and they have to be able to defend that point of view with logical argumentation and recourse to evidence, and then fit that into the appropriate genre needs. That is something that is best done not in a special writing class, but by incorporating writing tasks into other courses. So if you have an EFL undergraduate teacher preparation program, I'm sure there are all kinds of content courses there. And what needs to happen is that writing tasks that are oriented towards getting the students to produce argumentative writing that fits into the needs of the genre of ELT research writing, need to be incorporated into those content classes. Not every content class necessarily, different kinds of content lend themselves different to different kinds of ways of communicating. So not every class necessarily needs to have a 15-page paper in it, but some of them probably should. And there needs to be a scaffolded process where the students draft and redraft and redraft and get feedback. It's a very intensive, teacher-intensive, feedback-intensive, scaffolding-intensive kind of process. But there's not probably a better way to do it, which is why so people do it. Let's see, we have some other questions from, actually, before I go run and look at the other questions, Liliana, do you want to add something to that perhaps? You definitely have some experience in this area.
Yeah, question is, as you say, one of the, most important questions, and that I know that it doesn't also apply to the undergraduate level, but also I would take and echo your words and approach, which is, as you say, it's mostly a genre-based approach to address these issues early in our elementary levels.
Yeah, there's so much you could do in elementary level. Not write a thesis, but the skills that you then need.
Yeah, definitely. So I like, and I know that this is one of the questions that we always get in our, conversations. But my suggestion, I mean, according to what we also deal with, is to deal with genre, to do a lot of scaffolding, but also to do a lot of trial, error, and also assessment-based practices that lead to effective genre-based approach practices and activities and performances, because students at times, and also instructors, right, and that this is true, don't balance themselves with the different criterion concerning what they are going to assess in academic writing and what they are going to demand from students and what they really expect. So it's a triad that you really need to balance very well. So together with the assessment, with the expected norms, with the expected guidelines, which in turn acts as the standards and the guidelines that you have to deal with this persuasive and argumentative and academic writing. And I think that recapping on that, not only for the undergraduate level, but across levels, something that really works well is to try to think from a critical pedagogy perspective and a discourse analysis, if you want to use that to tell and to teach the students to position themselves with a piece of news, to position themselves with a short story that they write, to position themselves with the ad that they are watching when they are, traveling across cities or even in the same city, or when now that we are stuck in our homes, when they are watching the news, when the type of ads that they are, that appear when they are watching or playing one of the games that it's nowadays we have, we've been bombarded also in a multimodal way through all of the apps and through all of the, but that's another for another conversation, another cup of coffee. uh, Teaching them to position and to consolidate their arguments is something that we cannot place under any approach. I think it has to be, in my opinion and in our opinion, because I know that Cara agrees with me, it has to be a general tenet of the pedagogies behind academic writing. So basically, it would be a good strategy and tool that really matches many of the approaches without saying that this is the approach. It's just a practical strategy, and also it is a tenet, it's a guideline that we should advocate for. So let's go with the next question now. You're welcome, Aleida.
Donald asks a question which I'm not really sure that is very easily answered, possibly even less so than the other one. Who influences Colombian EAP, English for Academic Purposes, first? Swales or Halliday or US Composition Studies? I'm not sure. It's very easy to talk about the influences in Colombian English for academic purposes or Spanish for academic purposes, because as I say, I'm not sure either are stressed heavily within the educational system. In my experience, many students coming into the program, or many faculty who write in English and so forth, haven't heard so much of Swales or Halliday. So probably the main experience that people have with EAP before they get into undergraduate studies, or quite possibly graduate studies or beyond, are USA composition studies, in the sense that a lot of schools that teach in English, or international schools or bilingual schools or things like that, use curriculum from the US or British high school systems, secondary school systems. And so that's actually probably the most influential thing, things that come out of the current Common Core or current IB programs or things like that. But that's actually one of the issues that we're trying to look at more. There's not very much information, certainly in Colombia, perhaps there is elsewhere in Latin America, about how writing is being taught in either the first language or the second language. Everybody just kind of assumes it's there and is learned by osmosis. So I'm not sure we can give a much better answer than that. I don't know if you have something to add there, Liliana. You may know, you having come through the Colombian educational system, you may know more than I do about that.
Yeah, but as you say, it's hard to find a typology of the influences. Perhaps that is, one of the inquiries that we should go with Colombian teachers and practitioners. But I think it's a little bit of an mix and mingle Babel approach, just to be some metaphorically speaking. So I don't think that there is only one influence. And this also it's acquire, and as many of the, and most of the knowledge situations that it's acquired and distributed across time. So we are part of a culture that some of us have been trained out overseas, but some other people have not been trained overseas, and we have been the result, like of these mix and mingle, which is very effective. So it's also hard to say that we are most influenced by only one school or the other. I'm going to go with Mariana's question, and then perhaps Carl, you can pick up Carlos. So Mariana says, welcome, Mariana. So I understand that you are an undergraduate student. So welcome. We love to see undergraduate faces here. And she says, I'm on a research class at Universidad Distrital with Professor Rigoberto Castillo. I find it very accurate, the importance of making your voice be heard. Also, great advice from Professor. Just year she experienced a mental block because she sometimes believed that they can produce writing in the paper. Do you have some advice? Is her question, to follow up on your voice throughout the research without losing coherence. Yeah, that's both a skill, but it's also a habit, right? Once you start boosting the skill and developing, then it becomes a habit. You could use lots of outlines and lot of self-assessment practices, Mariana. uh, what are some of these outlines? The typical outline where you do your personal checklist, and there is where the assessment component ties in. You can say, okay, this is my paragraph. I wish I have a digital board and we had time to explain it. We have a board, draw it in your brain. And then I have my paragraphs here. So where is my argument? You can start highlighting where the argument is, and if you don't have one, you have to place one. It's just like when I am sure that all of us have put together a puzzle. So you're basically on a treasure hunt. We shouldn't be, but metaphorically speaking, we love playing with metaphors. We say, okay, you are going to find the argument. And when you have the argument has to be very solid and solid enough so it just displays your voice. So finding and doing this type of exercises, where's the supporting statement, where's the argument, where's what you have to say, how's that paragraph one ties to paragraph two, you know helps you ensure the coherence throughout the paper. So just, keeping up with good assessment, self-assessment. No one is going to do that, for you, unless you go after to, your peer reviewers or your expert teachers or instructors. You need to sit down and interact and read and enjoy and destroy and, redo and, I'll do all of the magic and the moves with your paper. So practically, this could be some examples, and I hope that this is useful for you. Let's go with Carlos' question. Carl, before we close, because I know that our director of programs is going to also have an important invitations for the audience.
Yeah, let me definitely address Carlos' question. Let me also very, very quickly address Victor Hugo Rojas's question. Is there a relation between L1 reading and writing competence and the development of EAP? The short answer is yes. If you can write a good paper in your first language, you can write a good paper in your second language. You may need to get somebody to help you with language issues in the second language, but if you know how to write a paper in your genre for your community, it will be a lot easier in the second language if you can already do that in the first language. We could talk about that more, but we won't because there's no time. I also need to deal with Carlos's question here, as Liliana pointed out to me, which is that many people see researching as a demanding process. And how have you gotten over this belief? I'm not sure that I have gotten over this belief. Research is a demanding process. It requires certain skill sets, and we often don't begin to learn them until we are effectively adults. Even if you're an undergraduate, you're adult. And as adults, we are kind of resistant to thinking that we need to learn new things and continue learning new things. the whole issue of imposter syndrome is very common among researchers. I believe the Spanish term for that is delirio de persecución, which is really a much better term. Um, I like the idea of having a persecution delirium better than I like that of being an imposter. But it is demanding, but it's not impossible. These are skills that people learn. And this goes back to what we said at the beginning of the session. If you can be a researcher, everyone can be a researcher. There is no researcher now, the most famous researcher that you've ever heard, not that researchers are really usually that famous, but the most famous one that you can think of started just like you are. Maybe they started older, maybe they started younger, but they started just like you are. And the great thing is that nowadays, especially in Latin America, especially in other parts of the developing world, thanks to the digital revolution, universities all over the developing world now have access to research online that simply wasn't possible 20 years ago. And now you have access to this information and you can join this conversation. You can find out what the conversation was going on much more easily than before. And you got to know what people are talking about. What is the status quo before we can go about asking what's wrong with it and changing it? So that's a huge issue. We could also talk about that more, but we probably shouldn't because we'll run out of time. So we do need to kind of wrap up a little bit, but we do hope that you have enjoyed the session. We will be uploading a recording of tonight's webinar as videos to the Unisabana ELT Facebook page and website, along with a document outlining the questions and answers that we've discussed in the session. We would definitely love to hear what you think about this web event. So we'll be sending you an email with a short survey, and as a token of appreciation, we'll provide you with a courtesy registration to our master's programs. I'm just going to put in the link also right now to the survey, just in case you're feeling, excited. And also, I should mention that speaking of the master's programs, for those of you who might be interested, there are, well, they're not very face-to-face at the moment, thanks to the pandemic, but there is a face-to-face master's program, and there is also an online master's program, which we have been running for almost 10 years. And so even if you are nowhere near Bogota, Colombia, you would be able to register and take part and study in the online master's program. And our glorious revolutionary leader, Jermaine McDougall, will be having an online meet and greet about the master's programs this coming Thursday. I think that's the 4th, June 4th, from 5 to 6 p.m. Colombian time. And I'm just going to post in the link to that. That's the one there, the bit.ly link. That's an open link to join the session on Thursday. It's from 5 to 6 p.m. Just try to type that into the chat. 5 to 6 p.m. meet and greet for master's programs. There we go. I have to hit the right key to send that in. Yeah. So you're very welcome to join that if you like. And certainly you're welcome to check out the Facebook pages, other social media sites for the department and the programs, the official website as well. We're going to be posting the videos as I say. And then let me just, to close up, in case you didn't catch the links previously, here's some information on how you can find myself and the good Dr. Liliana online. So there we go. You can find out more about our profiles there, some of our papers and publications and so forth. Some of those links there provide information about or access to our publications, as we say, related to tonight's topics, as well as other areas of our ongoing research, especially with regards to teaching research and teaching academic writing. And so you're welcome to go there. If you have trouble finding anything or want to talk to us more, that link is not working. It's redirecting to Microsoft Teams. So before we close up, Jermaine apparently, there we go. Okay.
Yeah,
So
Adriana has just posted. Thank you,
okay.
Adriana. Mm-hmm.
We literally just got that link like a few minutes ago for that session, so it's being updated as we speak. But in any case, you can definitely contact us through our academic profiles, through university email. I know some of you might have some more interest there. So we need to sign off now. It's just coming up on 7. We know everybody probably has very exciting plans for this evening, or at least as teachers, a lot of work still to do, probably.
Or for dinner,
Yeah,
Yeah.
you might even get dinner. Who knows? We really greatly appreciate your attention. We hope that tonight's session was productive. We hope that the links that we've been posting there, especially so you can get into the session for Thursday, so that maybe is why it's not looking for Thursday. We'll be working on Thursday. So there you go, just save it, and we'll, or rather Professor Tremaine will probably be seeing you then. So I think that's good night from myself.
And good night from me too. And then it was a pleasure, a true pleasure to have you here. And thank you for investing in you and for visiting us despite the circumstances that we are now connecting. Hopefully we have you soon in our campus, in our many activities. But in the meantime, we're going to, keep doing all of these webinars, all of these sessions. So stay tuned for more news and contact us in the department and in our programs. We look forward to seeing you there. Have a wonderful night. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, and hello again to all those familiar names, if not faces, that we couldn't see. We'll be talking to you sometime. Do let let the department know if there are other topics you would like to hear about in these webinar series. It's important to keep this kind of